Dominic LeBlanc, reactions to tonight's decision by the Conservative Party?
Well, obviously we want to congratulate Canada's new leader of the official opposition. Monsieur Poilievre ran an aggressive campaign and he won the overwhelming support of the Conservative Party. So I think it's appropriate to start by recognizing that the leader of the opposition is an important part of our democratic structure. So we want to begin by congratulating him on his victory.
Now, he has a party with 670,000 members, record membership, record votes, 4 times as many people voted for him as in this leadership run as for Justin Trudeau. People are saying they have momentum. They're tied with you right now in the public opinion polling. What do you make of the threat that this constitutes for you as a Liberal Party in the government?
We've always thought that as a government we need to work hard to support Canadians, to build an economy that works for all Canadians, to do the work of governing that Canadians elected us to do. So we're not going to lose that focus. A leadership campaign always brings new energy and new members to a political party. We've seen that in other parties as well. That's not unusual. What this leadership campaign has done for the Conservative Party is bring a series of rather reckless and irresponsible ideas and policies that we don't think are in the best interest of Canada in terms of building an economy that works for all Canadians, in terms of ensuring, Mr. Poilievre, who won the Conservative leadership tonight, said that the child care agreements, which are very important in terms of affordability for families, looking at some of the difficult circumstances around inflation, for example, he called those child care agreements a slush fund. He's told people that we could have avoided inflation if we'd invested in Bitcoin. I mean, these are the kind of irresponsible policies which we don't think say you're serious about governing.
On the child care agreements, just to be up for the record, though, he has not said he would scrap them. He said he will see how they work.
Yeah, he hasn't said he'll continue them either. So if you're a family that's had a 50% reduction in Ontario or in New Brunswick in your child care costs, and the new leader of the Conservative Party says they're slush funds, that doesn't sound like an endorsement of that important policy.
The Prime Minister's approval rating is are at record lows. He, for the first time, is below 50%. More than 50% of people disapprove of his handling of governing the country. You're facing severe concerns about inflation and the cost of living. Mr. Poilievre has made that his hobby horse, the cost of living, inflation, the economy.
Yeah, but again, if your hobby horse is the economy, you shouldn't suggest to Canadians that you can avoid inflation by investing in cryptocurrencies. So that doesn't sound to me like somebody who's serious about economic policy, or firing the governor of the Bank of Canada. Those don't sound like serious economic policies. We're focused on measures that ease the affordability crunch that Canadians are understandably concerned about. We recognize that. We share that concern. We've already done a great deal, but we're committed to doing even more. Simple slogans and reckless solutions doesn't constitute a great economic policy book.
Could those simple slogans and solutions, as you call them, though, be attracting a lot of people? Because the observers are pointing to a record number of young people expressing interest in the Conservative Party, record number of women expressing interest in this Conservative Party and this candidate.
Again, we're some years away from an election. As we know, if somebody had said to you 3 years ago that the country would go through, the world would go through a global pandemic, that we'd have some of the economic disruptions that the world is facing now, that you'd have the horrible circumstance of the Russian invasion in Ukraine. I mean, as we know, 3 years is a long time in politics. Our job as a government is to continue to do the work that we're committed to doing, that Canadians asked us to do. We'll let the Conservative Party explain their own reckless choices. We don't think it's a good idea to tell people that we want to make pollution free again or have more guns on Canadian streets. That's what Mr. Poilievre thinks is a priority. So we'll let Canadians judge over the coming months.
What about the central theme of his campaign was freedom? And it was just the leitmotif of his campaign. And it seems to have had some resonance. And Canadians are coming out of a pandemic era, and they're largely fed up. And now they're faced with record high levels of inflation. How concerned are you about those kind of that kind of politics taking off in terms of his appeal. He's obviously garnered something here.
Well, and we understand Canadians' understandable frustration with the pandemic, with the public health measures that were important both for the national government and many conservative provincial governments across the country as well. So if people are tired and frustrated with the last couple of years, we totally understand that. That's for us a reasonable proposition. But we also think that if you use a slogan like Mr. Poilievre continually does around freedom, he should explain to people what that means in terms of freedom to have more guns on Canadian streets, to have assault weapons be permitted again to be on Canadian streets or in Canadians' homes. What is his view on freedom of choice for women? He says that he'll allow Conservative MPs to introduce legislation that will restrict that constitutionally protected freedom of women. So standing on a bridge and shouting about freedom doesn't necessarily solve some of the serious economic and social problems the country has. And it's also contradicted by some of his own views, which in our view are regressive in terms of ensuring Canadians can safely and freely live in our cities, or women can know that their constitutionally protected right to choose is protected.
I'm hearing some of the themes now that may well be themes in terms of campaigning against Pierre Poilievre and his Conservatives. Let's flip the scenario on its head. Would you have been more concerned if Jean Charest, a centrist, and someone considered more moderate, would have become the leader of the Conservative Party?
Martin, you've been around these conventions a long time. A Liberal member of Parliament and Cabinet Minister offering views on who the Conservative Party should have chosen as their leader doesn't really speak to the seriousness of the moment. The Conservatives have selected their leader. Our job is to continue to govern as Canadians elected us to do, to work with all parliamentarians, and I accept the premise that the leader of the official opposition has an important parliamentary role. So our objective will be to work with all different parties in the House of Commons. We're in a minority parliament. We'll be looking to other parties to support what we think are measures that are in the best interest of making the Canadian economy work, as I said, for Canadians. Those are the kind of things we'll be focused on. So we'll work with whoever the Conservatives have chosen as their leader if those policies, in our view, and in the view of Canadians, advance our collective interest.
Last question, and to people who say that governments defeat themselves, governments are largely victims of people getting tired of them, feeling that they're not there for them, how concerned are you about the dipping in ratings in Liberal fortunes?
But as I said, we're a few years away from an election. The country's in a difficult economic circumstance. We don't dismiss that. We don't say that the understandable concerns Canadians have are not real. But we also know that a year in politics is a long time. And elections are also about choices. So your premise may not be wrong, but people also choose not between some idea of perfection. They choose when they go to vote between real alternatives and real people and real political parties. And we think when they understand some of the irresponsible and reckless things that Mr. Poilievre has advocated in the last number of months, that choice, we think, will tell Canadians that they need a responsible, mature and serious government to look after the country at a serious time.
Dominic LeBlanc, thank you very much for taking the time.
Thank you. Have a great evening.